Marble Madness is an arcade game that was released in 1984 by Atari. In it, you move a marble through 6 courses as you try to make it from start to finish. It's a good game on its own right, with every level having unique set pieces, and the later levels being challenging to complete. But what truly made it special was its trackball controller. This analog controller allowed the player to move at any speed they wanted to, as long as they could spin the ball fast enough. Because of this, the movement was quick and more varied than what could be done on a normal arcade joystick. The trackball, along with its challenging levels, gave Marble Madness a unique feel that helped it become a popular arcade game when it was released. With its success in arcades, home releases were inevitable. Depending on what console it was released on, the graphics would have to be changed, and some gameplay elements would have to be removed. But like many other arcade games from this time, the home version's main problem was translating the arcade machine's controls to the console's standard controller. This leads us to our main topic, Marble Madness on the Sega Mega Drive. Originally starting as a port of Marble Madness for the PC Engine, the Mega Drive version was released in Japan in 1993 by Tengen. Tengen was known for releasing many ports of arcade games to home consoles, with some being great, and others being as good as they could be. This version of Marble Madness is one of the great ports they did. Right after a tech demo-esque zoom-in screen, we see a title screen that mimics a real Marble Madness arcade machine on free play. Something like this is really cool to see, since most ports of arcade games would just make it say press start and that would be it. This attention to detail is a good sign as we go to the game's first level. The game's interface, sprites, and colors look almost exactly like the arcade game. This may not sound impressive given that the game was almost 10 years old at this point, but looking at some of the older ports, they never quite matched the arcade version. On systems that could render a similar amount of colors as the arcade game, the graphics either seemed softer or just less detailed. Even the port done by EA on the same system had slightly different graphics and forced you to play as the red marble for some reason. Every level's gimmicks are here too, and work wonderfully. The green waves spawn correctly, the pipes have all their many patterns, the tubes in the silly race and the final race send you to a random exit. And the final race's disappearing platforms change fast and keep you moving like the arcade version. The music and sound effects might be slightly lower quality than the arcade version, but they're very hard to tell apart. Really, the only differences the main game has from the arcade version are such minor nitpicks that they aren't even worth mentioning. With everything so far being perfect to the arcade game, it's no surprise that the controls feel perfect as well. You move your marble by using the D-pad, and you make your marble move faster by holding one of the face buttons. This is supposed to mimic the different speeds you can move your marble at in the arcade version, and for the most part, this works well. You still feel like you're pushing your marble using momentum, so you'll sometimes have to move earlier than expected in order to not fall off the path due to your previous momentum. Other ports before this such as the NES version, have implemented the same controls, so by this time it was a tested control scheme that developers knew worked. Here, the controls are enhanced by the accurate physics with the environment. Going down slopes and bumping into walls can feel just as challenging and frustrating as the original, although here it's alleviated by just having to hold the direction when you don't want to fall off the course, instead of having to rapidly spin a trackball. Now, even though this is an excellent port and exceeds basically every other console port at the time, these aspects of it have been surpassed through official emulation. In LEGO Dimensions, you can play the arcade version of Marble Madness with the same controls that the Mega Drive version uses. I haven't played this version of Marble Madness, so I can't say if the controls work well for the arcade version, but if they do work fine, then what would be the point of playing this port now? Well, I'll introduce you to what makes this port stand out above all the other console ports. And here it is, the Sega Mouse. The Sega Mouse was also released in Japan in 1993, with Europe getting it in 1994, and the US getting a different hardware revision that same year. Unfortunately, the US version would get rid of a critical feature that required me to get the Japanese version, but I'll mention that soon. This mouse came looking similar to other computer and console mice at the time. 2 big buttons for left clicking and right clicking, and a trackball underneath for moving the cursor. However, this mouse had a unique feature. When flipped over, the trackball would stay above the surface instead of falling back into the mouse. You can even click on the ball as an extra button. The back of the box calls this a completely different mode, but I think that's over-exaggerating it a bit. What it does mean is that this console, that doesn't have its own arcade trackball controller, now has a smaller version in the form of this mouse. And using this mouse, this version of Marble Madness was able to implement trackball controls. But before we get too into that, let's get this out of the way. This is the Sega Sports Pad for the Sega Master System. It's a much bigger and more traditional arcade trackball than the previously shown mouse. As the name implies, the controller was mainly made for sports games on the Master System, but it would be perfect for arcade games like this. This controller does fit into the Sega Genesis's controller port, but it only half works. Unlike the Sega Mouse, the Sega Sports Pad actually has 2 modes, as indicated by this switch. One is for using it as a trackball controller, where any game that supports that controller will be able to use the full range of movement it offers. The other mode makes it work like a standard Master System controller, where the analog movements of the trackball are instead outputted as digital buttons on the D-pad. The Sega Genesis does support standard Master System controllers, so technically this mode would work in Marble Madness, but you would be missing out on the analog movements the controller is supposed to offer. And sadly, the trackball mode is not supported by Marble Madness. There were rumors online that this would work with this game, which is why I picked it up, but as you can see, the inputs are not picked up correctly. I'm not exactly sure why it wasn't supported, or if there was some hardware problem that kept it from working, but it's a shame that this wasn't supported. Well, having something is better than nothing, so let's look at how the Sega Mouse performs. Right before we start the game, we're going to look at the options menu. You can see that the game does recognize the mouse, and that there are some settings to adjust the mouse. Move scale changes how fast your marble moves as you spin the ball. Personally, I don't like the default speed, so I bring it up somewhere before 2.0. Clicking on the ball will get us out of this menu, and clicking it again will start the game. Going into the game and actually using the trackball isn't as bad as you would think it would be. Yes, there are a few problems. Having to hold the mouse with one of your hands means that you can't use both of your hands to move the ball, and for me, who usually uses their left hand to go up left when needed, Going up left can be a slog. But other than that, you're definitely playing Marble Madness with a trackball. You still have to be quick if you want to move through courses as fast as possible and make sharp turns. The high speed I put on in the settings makes some turns a little too quick, but for the most part I don't notice it. Parts with complicated slopes that were a breeze on the standard controller will now get you a few times, unless you're truly skilled at moving your marble with the trackball. It's exciting to have this type of difficulty after getting used to playing with the standard controller, and it's even more interesting by the fact that I'm getting this from a 16-bit console. Overall, Marble Madness on the Mega Drive is a great port of the arcade game that's made even better by supporting the console's trackball mouse. Sure, there are more accessible versions of Marble Madness, and you can always use MAME to play the arcade version with a USB trackball, but that's not the point for me. I love all the effort Tengen put into making this as close to the original as possible, going so far as to support the mouse to make it control like the original too. It resulted in an incredible console port that is one of the best ways to play Marble Madness with a controller, and is one of my most favorite ways to play one of my most favorite arcade games of all time. Thank you so much for watching the video. I wasn't sure if anyone would actually watch a video on just the random port of an old arcade game, but if you got here, hopefully you liked it. I mainly wanted to make this video because it seems like everyone knows about the NES version, which is fine, but it's not the arcade version. And not too many people knew about this. I mean, I think I only learned about it maybe a year or two ago or so. So hopefully this makes people more aware of this version. And also because I wanted to show off the game being played with the mouse. I don't think there was a video of that previously. There might have been one that was an emulated mouse, but there wasn't one that was like the real thing. So I'm really glad that I got that out there. Thanks again for watching, and hopefully I'll have something else that you'll enjoy. See ya!